Every soul that entered her boarding house left something behind: a coat, a coin, a quiet memory. But one man left behind a truth that shattered the life she thought she'd rebuilt. Montana, autumn of 1873. The wind howled like a warning across the empty plains, carrying with it dust, leaves, and stories no one dared to tell. Clara Dawson stood on the porch of her weathered boarding house, arms folded tight against the evening chill, staring into the horizon as if it owed her answers. She had built this place with trembling hands and a broken heart. Not for business, not for charity, but because keeping her door open made the silence less loud. Strangers came and went. Some stayed a night, some stayed longer. None ever looked back. Her husband, Thomas, never came home from the war. No grave to visit, no goodbye to whisper. Just a letter soaked in rain and a lifetime of unanswered questions. And so, Clara kept moving, kept cooking, kept pretending the fire in her hearth could warm what was frozen inside her. That night, as the stew bubbled on the stove and the fire cracked in protest, there came a knock. 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 Slow. Heavy. Like a man unsure if he was welcome. She opened the door. The figure standing there looked like he'd been carved out of the storm. Tall, lean, coat frayed at the edges, a battered hat pulled low. His eyes, shadowed beneath the brim, met hers with an expression she couldn't place. "Evenin', ma'am," he said, his voice a quiet rasp. "You got a room?" Clara hesitated, not because she feared him, but because something about him made her forget how to breathe. "Yes," she said softly. "Come in." He stepped over the threshold, bringing with him more than dust and silence. Something unseen followed, something that made the lamps flicker, just slightly. "Names. Blake," he said, signing the guest book with steady hands. "Well, Mr. Blake," Clara replied, "supper's still warm. Bathroom's down the hall, and if you hear footsteps tonight, don't worry. This old house likes to talk." He gave her a faint smile. "So do old ghosts." And with that, he disappeared into his room. That night, Clara sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames, but the warmth didn't reach her bones, and when the house creaked, it wasn't just the wind. Something had entered her home, and it knew her name, even if she didn't know his. The morning brought fog, thick, low, and silent. It rolled over the hills like a ghost returning to familiar ground. Clara moved, quietly through the kitchen, the scent of coffee and firewood weaving through the house. She set the table for one, half hoping Blake would sleep in and half dreading what questions he might bring. But he was already awake. She found him outside on the porch, sitting in the same chair Thomas once claimed as his. His boots were dusty, his hat pulled low, but his eyes watched the empty fields like they were whispering things only he could hear. "You're up early," Clara said gently. "Didn't sleep much," Blake replied without turning. "Old bones, old dreams." She offered him coffee, which he accepted with a nod. As they sat in silence, she noticed something strange. A small chain peeking from his coat pocket. It looked old, worn, and oddly familiar. She didn't say anything then. But once he excused himself to walk into town for supplies, Clara stepped into his room. The bed was made, too neatly, like a soldier's hand had touched every corner. But it was the nightstand that caught her eye. Lying there was a small brass locket, oval, scratched, and unmistakable. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. She had seen this before, years ago, in a photo she had long since burned. Inside the locket was a tiny portrait, faded, water-damaged, but still visible. Her, not as she looked now, but as she had the day Thomas left for war. The same braided hair, the same white dress. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She placed the locket back exactly as she found it, stepped out of the room, and closed the door slowly. Why would Blake carry her portrait? Who was he really, and why did he look so much like someone she once knew? By midday, the fog had lifted, but Clara's thoughts had only grown murkier. She couldn't shake the image of that locket. Her locket. The one she had gifted Thomas the night before he left for war. She'd assumed it lost in the chaos of the battlefield, buried somewhere with him, or stolen long ago. But now it was here, in the room of a man who claimed to be a stranger. The door creaked open. Clara turned quickly, heart thudding. Blake stepped inside, arms filled with a sack of flour, a tin of coffee, and something else, wrapped in soft cloth. "I figured the house could use restocking," he said casually, placing the goods on the kitchen table. She nodded stiffly. "You didn't have to." "I know. But I've stayed in enough homes to know a little kindness goes a long way." Then he placed the wrapped cloth in front of her. "Found this with a trader outside town. Said it was dug up from the old battleground near Red Rock Valley." Her hands hesitated. She unwrapped the fabric slowly. Inside was a small, carved wooden horse. Roughly whittled, edges smoothed by age. But she knew it. Her fingers traced the tiny initials on the underside. T.D. Thomas. Dawson, her late husband's childhood carving. She remembered how he carried it in his coat pocket like a lucky charm. "How did this—" she started, her voice catching. "I don't know," Blake said gently. "But when I saw it, something told me it needed to come home." Clara looked at him, really looked. The shape of his jaw, the curve of his brow. There was no denying it now. He looked eerily like Thomas, older, worn down, but enough to haunt her. She swallowed. "Who are you really, Mr. Blake?" He met her eyes, and for a moment, something flickered there. Pain, recognition, guilt. "Just a man looking for peace," he said, but Clara could feel it in her bones, and this wasn't a coincidence. And peace had never come easy to the Dawsons. By dusk, clouds gathered above Fair Hill like a warning no one dared ignore. The air grew thick, and the scent of rain clung to the wind like an omen. Clara stood at the window, arms folded, watching the storm crawl over the hills. Her thoughts were heavier than the sky itself. In the corner of the room, the wooden horse sat on the mantel beside a fading photograph. Her and Thomas, smiling, long before war and silence had split them apart. Behind her, Blake moved quietly. He'd offered to light the lamps, tend the fire, and keep the cold at bay. But what unsettled Clara more than the storm was how natural he seemed in her home, as if he belonged. The rain came sudden and hard, slamming against the windows. Thunder roared like distant cannons, and the lights flickered once, twice, before surrendering. Clara lit a lantern, its flame soft but steady. "Looks like you'll be staying in tonight," she said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Blake nodded. "I've seen worse storms. Back in Tennessee, lightning would split trees like matchsticks." "Tennessee?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. He looked up. "Yeah, fought there. Briefly. 12th Infantry." Her breath caught. Thomas had served in the 12th. Her fingers clenched the edge of the table. "Did you know a Thomas Dawson?" Blake hesitated. Silence stretched between them, thick and sharp. Finally he spoke. "Yes, I did." He turned toward the fire, voice low. "We served in the same unit. He was brave, loyal, took a bullet meant for me during an ambush." Clara's knees weakened. She sat slowly, gripping the chair as if the truth might carry her away. "You were with him when he died?" Blake's eyes flickered, and then a whisper. "No, I was there when he disappeared." Outside, lightning struck, blinding for a second. Inside, the lantern shook. Clara stared at him, her heart racing with a mix of fear, hope, and something she dared not name. "Disappeared?" she echoed. Blake nodded. "They never found the body, but I know where he went. I saw it happen." Clara leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me." But Blake didn't answer. Not yet. He stared into the fire, and for a moment it looked like he was staring into the past itself. The storm raged like a wild beast outside, wind slamming shutters, thunder shaking the bones of the old house. Inside, only the fire dared speak. Clara sat still, eyes locked on Blake, her breath shallow, her hands curled in her lap. He finally turned toward her, voice soft, heavy with the weight of years. It was spring, near a place we called Widow's Hollow. Thick woods, no moon. We'd been marching for days, tired, starving, hunted. Blake's jaw tensed as memories surfaced. Thomas. He wasn't just brave. He was the kind of man others followed without question. He kept us moving when we wanted to fall, gave us hope when the world had none. Clara's throat tightened. She could see it, her Thomas, with mud on his boots and fire in his heart. One night, Blake continued, we camped by a ridge. Fog came in thick, real thick, the kind that makes you lose direction, and sometimes your mind. He paused. Thomas volunteered to scout ahead with 2 others. I stayed behind with the wounded, but they never came back. Her heart clenched. We searched for hours, found the other 2 men's bodies in the creek the next morning. But Thomas, he shook his head. No blood, no trail, just gone. Clara whispered. You think he deserted? Blake looked at her, eyes raw. No, never. Thomas Dawson wouldn't run from a storm, much less a fight. Clara leaned forward. Then what happened? Blake hesitated. The firelight flickered across his face, painting shadows like scars. There was something strange about that place. The locals said it was cursed, that sometimes it swallowed men whole, and those it didn't came back changed. Clara's skin prickled. Changed how? She asked. He looked at her with a gaze that chilled her to her bones. They forgot who they were. Clara stared, her breath catching. Was Blake implying? No, it couldn't be. But in her heart, something cracked open. For the first time in years. Hope dared to speak. The storm passed by dawn, leaving behind puddles, broken branches, and a silence that buzzed with unfinished words. Clara hadn't slept. Not really. She kept replaying Blake's words in her mind. They forgot who they were. Could it be possible? Could a man vanish into the woods and come back someone else? As the first light crept through the window, she moved through the house like a ghost. Cautious, quiet, trembling with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Blake was still asleep on the sofa, one arm draped across his chest, the other hanging limp toward the floor. Beside him, his worn leather bag rested half open. She stared at it and then slowly reached inside, a flask, a pocket knife, a tiny leather-bound book, and at the bottom, a folded piece of yellowed paper. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Her breath stopped. It was a letter, and not just any letter. It was written in Thomas's handwriting. She would know those sharp T's and looping R's anywhere. She had memorized every inch of his last letter from the war, but this, she had never seen before. Clara, if someone finds this before I make it home, know that I tried. God knows I tried. But the yuck. Woods are thick and I don't know what's real anymore. I see faces in the dark, hear voices calling me by name, but they're not yours. If I forget who I am, please don't forget me. Forgive me if I never come back the way I left. Tears blurred Clara's vision. This wasn't just memory. This was proof. A piece of Thomas. Here. Now. She looked at Blake, still sleeping, and suddenly she wasn't sure whether to wake him or run. Because the man in her living room might not be a stranger. He might be the ghost of her husband, returned in flesh, but carrying the weight of a life neither of them could fully remember. The morning light spilled across the floor as Clara stood frozen, the letter still in her trembling hands. Blake stirred on the sofa, brow furrowing as if his dreams had turned dark. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her and the letter. His face went still. "Where did you find that?" he asked, sitting up slowly. "In your bag," she replied, voice brittle as dry wood. Blake stood. The room grew smaller, quieter, like the world was holding its breath. "Clara, I can explain." "No," she said, holding the letter up like a blade. "I'll speak now." She stepped closer, eyes sharp. "This is his handwriting. I'd stake my life on it. This was written by Thomas Dawson." Blake looked away, his hands tightening into fists. "You said you were just a soldier who knew him, but this is personal." He didn't deny it. She took another step. "Tell me the truth. Are you him?" A long silence fell, thick as smoke, heavy with 1,000 unspoken words. Finally, he met her eyes. "I don't know," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I don't remember much before the woods. My name, my past, just fragments, feelings." I woke up beside a river 3 days after the ambush, bleeding and alone. The only thing in my coat was that letter and the wooden horse. Clara stared, her world tilting. "I wandered for months," Blake continued. "The name Blake was something a preacher gave me when I collapsed outside his church. He said I looked like a man with sins too heavy to carry alone." Clara sank into the nearest chair, heart pounding like hooves on dry earth. "If you're Thomas, if there's even a chance—" "I came here," he interrupted, voice cracking, "because something in me pulled me. This town. Your name. That locket. They all haunted my dreams." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then why not tell me sooner?" "Because I was afraid," he whispered. "Afraid that if I was him, I wouldn't be the man you remembered." Clara stood, stepping close, her fingers brushing the scar on his temple. He didn't flinch. "Whether you're Thomas or Blake," she said softly, "you came back. Somehow, you found your way home." But just as hope began to flicker between them, the front door creaked open, and a stranger stood there, soaked in rain, eyes wild. "I've been looking for you," the man said to Blake. "Your real name isn't Blake, and you're not supposed to be here." The stranger stepped into the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the wooden floor. His coat was torn, boots caked in mud, and a scar ran down the side of his face like a blade of truth. Clara instinctively moved closer to Blake, who stood frozen, eyes locked on the man like he'd seen a ghost. "You don't remember me, do you?" the man asked, his voice rough like gravel. Blake's silence was answer enough. The man stepped closer. "Name's Elijah Mercer. We served together. Widow's Hollow. You saved my life that night." Clara blinked. "You know him?" Elijah nodded. "Knew him as Thomas Dawson. He took a shot to the head. We thought he was dead. Left him behind when the shooting started again." His voice softened. "I carried the guilt for years." Blake swallowed hard. "I woke up by a river. Alone. I didn't know my name. Still don't, not really." Elijah looked at him, eyes shining. "You are Thomas. I'd bet my soul on it. You had a birthmark on your right shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. You used to joke it made you part wolf." Blake's hand instinctively reached up, unbuttoning his shirt. He turned slightly, and there it was. Clara gasped. The mark was still there, faded but unmistakable. Everything inside her crumbled and reformed in the same breath. Her husband, lost for years, found in flesh, but shattered in memory. "Elijah," she whispered, "where have you been?" He hesitated. "Looking, waiting, hoping someone would find him before they did." Clara frowned. "They?" Elijah's voice dropped. "The ones who live in the woods. The ones who don't let men leave once they've been claimed. A chill swept through the room. Blake stiffened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Elijah whispered, "you brought something back with you, Thomas, and it's coming." That night, the wind didn't howl. It whispered. Low, curling murmurs danced through the trees like something ancient had woken from slumber. Clara stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. Outside, the ranch looked the same, but felt different. The air was too still, the shadows too deep. Inside, Elijah paced the living room while Blake sat quietly, hands trembling, as if his own body no longer trusted him. "I told you," Elijah muttered. "They don't forget. The forest marks who it touches, and when you leave, they follow." Clara turned sharply. "Who are they?" "Old things," Elijah said, voice low. "Things older than this land. Spirits, maybe, or something worse. They don't like their secrets getting out." Blake suddenly looked up. "I've seen them. In my dreams. Eyes in the trees. Voices calling me back." He pressed his fingers to his temples. "I can't sleep. When I do, I hear her." Clara froze. "Her?" Blake nodded. "A woman, dressed in white, face made of bark. She whispers my name. Not Blake, not Thomas. Something older." The lamps flickered. A cold draft crept into the room. Suddenly, from the barn, a sharp crack echoed like wood snapping. All three jumped. Elijah grabbed his rifle. "Stay here." But Clara stepped forward. "No, this is my land, my home. If something's out there, I need to know." They moved as a group, out into the night, oil lanterns lighting the way. The barn door hung open. Inside, the horses were panicked, snorting, stomping, eyes wide with fear, and carved into the wooden wall were symbols. Deep, jagged, freshly burned into the timber. Clara's breath hitched. Blake stared at them, his voice hollow. "I've seen these before. In the forest. They were carved into the trees, right before the others vanished." Elijah raised his lamp. "They've marked this place." Clara stepped back, the earth beneath her feet no longer feeling like her own, because whatever followed Thomas out of those woods was already here. Rain lashed the windows as the three of them returned from the barn. Clara couldn't sleep, not after what they saw. The symbols, the horses' terror, the feeling that something was watching them. It was all too real. She needed answers. Leaving. The others downstairs, she climbed the creaking attic steps, the old place where her grandfather kept trunks of forgotten memories. Cobwebs clung to her hair as she pulled out a heavy cedar chest. Inside, faded blankets, rusted tools, and a thick leather-bound journal wrapped in cloth. She opened it. The handwriting was her grandfather's. October 1839. "Something lives in the forest." Clara blinked. Her grandfather, Joseph Dawson, had always been a quiet man, never spoke of the war, never spoke of the land beyond Widow's Hollow, and now he was writing about them. She flipped through pages filled with drawings, the same symbols they found in the barn, and crude sketches of creatures made of branches and bone. "We made a deal," one entry read, "to keep the land fertile, to keep the sickness away. One soul every generation, left at the forest's edge on the blood moon." Her heart pounded. Her throat tightened. "In 1859, my brother James disappeared. He heard the whispers first." Another entry. They said, "If we broke the pact, the forest would take more than one. It would take who we love, who we need." She slammed the book shut, hands shaking. It wasn't just about Thomas. This curse, this deal, was older, deeper, in her family's blood. Downstairs, thunder cracked. Then a scream. She bolted down the stairs. Elijah stood near the door, rifle raised. Blake was on his knees, eyes rolled back, whispering in a voice that wasn't his own. "Elijah," Clara cried. He didn't turn. "It's inside him." Thomas's voice twisted, low and inhuman. "The forest remembers its debt, and blood will pay." Thomas's body convulsed on the floor, his breath ragged. His mouth moved, but the words weren't his. They echoed with something ancient, something wrong. Clara dropped to her knees beside him. "Thomas, fight it, please!" But his eyes, once so warm, were pitch black now. Like the forest had crawled inside and hollowed him out. Elijah aimed his rifle. "We need to end this now, before it fully takes over." "No!" Clara screamed, shielding Thomas with her own body. "There has to be another way." Thomas's voice came again, twisted. "You broke the pact, and now the land takes what it's owed." Clara grabbed the old journal and flipped through feverishly. One passage leapt out at her. "Only the blood of the line that broke the pact can restore balance." Her heart froze. Her line. The Dawsons. It wasn't just about saving Thomas anymore. The curse had lived in her blood for generations. Her grandfather had made the deal, and now she had to pay the price. "Elijah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not him they want. It's me." Elijah lowered the rifle slowly. "Clara, don't say that." She stood up, firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "The journal says only the blood of the one who broke the pact can fix it. My family started this. I have to end it." Thomas, or whatever was inside him, suddenly stopped twitching. He looked up at her, and for a flicker of a second, he was back. "Clara," he rasped, barely audible. "Don't." She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'd rather lose everything than let you disappear again." Then she turned and walked toward the front door, into the storm, the journal clutched to her chest. Elijah chased her to the porch. "Clara, you go out there, they'll take you. You might never come back." She looked over her shoulder, her eyes blazing with resolve. "Then let them take me, but they won't take him." She stepped into the rain and headed toward the forest. Behind her, the wind picked up, and the shadows shifted, almost like they were welcoming her as she vanished into the trees. The whispers grew louder, a pulse in the earth. The forest. Awakening. Clara walked deeper into Widow's Hollow, the rain washing away the bloodline she carried like it was trying to cleanse her soul. The forest around her groaned, not from wind or storm, but as if it breathed. She followed. The whispers. They weren't just calling her name anymore. They were telling her a story. A memory. Visions flared before her eyes, flickers of the past. Her grandfather Joseph, as a young man, standing in the same woods, holding a newborn baby wrapped in cloth. A pale figure stood across from him, tall, bark-skinned, glowing, eyes reaching for the child. Joseph whispered, "A soul for the soil." Then another vision, her great-uncle James vanishing into the forest, never to return. Clara stumbled, breath hitching. They had done this, again and again. She reached the clearing. At its center, the hollow tree. Twisted, ancient, blackened from lightning and time. Its trunk was open like a screaming mouth. Inside, the air buzzed. Clara stepped in. The whispers turned to voices, familiar, soft, painful. Her mother, her father, both long dead. "You don't belong here, Clara," they whispered. "Go back." But another voice rose, herself as a child, crying, lost. Then came the figure, the same creature from the tree line, towering over her, but now Clara didn't flinch. "You want a life?" she said, holding up the journal. "Take mine. End the pact. Let him go." The forest stilled, a pause. Then, the figure bowed its head and walked into her. She gasped, light pouring from her chest, images flashing in her mind like fire, the first deal, made in desperation during a plague. Each soul offered, each betrayal, each broken promise. And then, silence. The air shifted, the weight lifted, and she knew. The curse was broken. She collapsed to the forest floor, eyes closing, ready to give her life. But somewhere far behind, Thomas woke up, eyes clear, heart racing. "Clara," he whispered, and ran into the woods, toward the hollow tree. The forest was still. Thomas's boots crushed the leaves beneath him, his heart pounding. The storm had finally stopped, but the tension in the air felt heavier, as though the world was holding its breath. He ran. He had to find Clara. He couldn't lose her again. The hollow tree loomed ahead, its twisted branches reaching into the sky like gnarled fingers. But as Thomas approached, the air around him grew colder, unnaturally so. His breath came in visible bursts as if the very atmosphere was resisting his presence. He stepped into the clearing, and there she was, Clara, kneeling at the base of the tree, her hair wild, her eyes closed. She didn't move. "Clara!" Thomas rushed to her side, shaking her gently. "Clara, please." Her eyes fluttered open, but they weren't the same. They gleamed with something otherworldly. Her pupils were pale, like the moonlight had seeped into her veins. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice soft but distant. "You shouldn't have come." Her fingers twitched, as if she were still fighting to hold on to something deep inside. "I had to," he said, desperate. "You're still here. I know it." She looked at him, but not like she used to. Her gaze was filled with sorrow, a deep, old sorrow. "I did what I had to do," she replied, voice trembling. "The curse is broken. The pact has been paid." He frowned. "But you're changed. Clara, what did you give?" She closed her eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. "Everything." A chilling silence followed. The hollow tree began to shift, its bark creaking like it had a life of its own. Shadows twisted and turned, moving as if the very forest itself were alive, breathing with a pulse of its own. "I can feel it now," she said, her voice distant. "The forest. It's a part of me. Part of us." Thomas stepped back. "No. Clara, no. You can't let it take you. We can fix this." But Clara shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "It's not about fixing it. It's about understanding it. This land, these woods, they've always been a part of me." Suddenly, the ground trembled. The shadows swirled, rising in a spiral around Clara. Thomas reached for her, but something unseen stopped him. The air was thick with energy. The forest had woken and it had claimed her. "I'm not the same anymore, Thomas," she whispered. "And neither is this place." Before he could say anything, she vanished into the shadows, not running, but becoming part of them. And then, silence. Thomas stood alone in the clearing, trembling. The forest was no longer the same. Clara was no longer the same. And he knew deep in his bones that the curse wasn't just over. It was starting. The sun barely rose the next morning. Its light struggled to break through the heavy fog that now wrapped the ranch like a shroud. Birds didn't sing. The animals didn't stir. Even the wind had gone silent. Thomas rode back alone. His hands trembled on the reins, his mind a blur of everything he had just seen. Clara was gone, and yet, not. He could feel her in the trees, in the soil, in the silence. As he approached the ranch house, something in his gut twisted. The place felt wrong. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching over dead leaves that hadn't been there yesterday. Elijah stepped out onto the porch. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. "You look like hell," Elijah muttered. "She's not gone," Thomas replied, voice hoarse. "She's just changed." Elijah didn't argue. "Things have been happening since you left," he said. "The animals are restless, shadows moving through the barn at night. The well water turned black this morning. Thomas clenched his fists. It's the forest. Clara said it wasn't over, that the land was part of her now. They both stood in silence. Then Thomas noticed something. On the barn door, a symbol, etched in the wood, clean and deep. It hadn't been there before. A spiral carved with precision, the same symbol from the journal. She's marking the land, Thomas whispered. What does it mean? Elijah asked. Thomas swallowed hard. It means she's still protecting us, but she's also warning us. That night, Thomas sat alone by the fire, holding Clara's old scarf in his hands. He stared into the flames, replaying every moment they'd shared. The laughter, the pain, the kiss by the storm. Outside, the wind began to rise. It carried a whisper, soft, gentle. His name. He stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding. The forest stood silent, but at the edge of the trees, a figure, barefoot, long hair. Clara, no, not anymore. She turned and vanished into the woods, and Thomas understood. She wasn't calling for help. She was calling him home. Thomas stood at the edge of the forest, the wind cold against his skin, Clara's scarf clutched in his hand like a tether to the life he once knew. Behind him, the ranch sat quiet, safe for now. But it wasn't home anymore, not without her. He looked toward the trees. She was in there, changed, bound to something older than time, older than love. But he had seen it in her eyes before she vanished. She hadn't forgotten him. He took a deep breath and stepped into the woods. Each footfall was like a heartbeat. The forest recognized him. Branches swayed, though there was no breeze. Whispers curled around him like smoke, voices he couldn't understand, yet somehow felt in his bones. Then he saw her. In a clearing bathed in silver moonlight, Clara stood barefoot, her white dress glowing faintly. She looked both exactly the same and entirely different. Her eyes held galaxies. "Thomas," she whispered, as if she'd been waiting centuries. He stepped closer, tears slipping down his cheek. "I came for you." She shook her head softly. "You shouldn't have." "I had to," he said, voice trembling. "You gave up everything to protect me. I won't live in a world where you're just a memory." Clara stepped forward. Her hand brushed his cheek, cold and warm all at once. "If you stay," she said, "you leave everything behind. No more sunrises, no more ranch, no more world. Only this, only me." Thomas looked at her, heart raw. "Then I'm already home." And he took her hand. The forest sighed, long and deep. All around them, the trees glowed faintly. The earth hummed, the wind stilled. Together, they stepped deeper into the hollow, until the light swallowed them both. Back at the ranch, Elijah found the scarf days later on the porch railing. The forest beyond never caused harm again. The curse was over. But some nights when the moon is high and the wind is still, if you listen closely, you can hear two voices in the trees, laughing together forever. The end.